Solomon Islands is a sovereign country consisting of a large number of islands in Oceania lying to the east of Papua New Guinea and northwest of Vanuatu and covering a land area of 28,400 square kilometers. The country's capital, Honiara, is located on the island of Guadalcanal. The country takes its name from the Solomon Islands archipelago, which is a collection of Melanesian islands that also includes the North Solomon Islands, but excludes outlying islands, such as Renal and Bellona, and the Santa Cruz Islands. The islands have been inhabited for thousands of years. In 1568, the Spanish navigator Álvaro de Mendana was the first European to visit them, naming them the Islas Salomon. Britain defined its area of interest in the Solomon Islands archipelago in June 1893, when Captain Gibson R.N. of HMS Curaçao declared the Southern Solomon Islands as a British protectorate with the proclamation of the British Solomon Islands Protectorate. During World War II, the Solomon Islands campaign saw fierce fighting between the United States and the Empire of Japan, such as in the Battle of Guadalcanal. The official name of the then British Overseas Territory was changed from the British Solomon Islands Protectorate to Solomon Islands in 1975. Self-government was achieved in 1976. Independence was obtained 2 years later. Today, Solomon Islands is a constitutional monarchy with the Queen of Solomon Islands, currently Queen Elizabeth II, as its head of state. Manasseh Soghavari is the current Prime Minister of Solomon Islands. Etymology. In 1568, the Spanish navigator Álvaro de Mendana was the first European to visit the Solomon Islands archipelago, naming it Islas Salomon after the wealthy biblical King Solomon. It is said that they were given this name in the mistaken assumption that they contained great riches. During most of the period of British rule, the territory was officially named the British Solomon Islands Protectorate. On the 22nd of June 1975, the territory was renamed Solomon Islands. When Solomon Islands became independent in 1978, they retained the name. The definite article, the, is not part of the country's official name but is sometimes used, both within and outside the country. History. Early history. It is believed that Papuan-speaking settlers began to arrive around 30,000 BC. Austronesian speakers arrived c. 4000 BC, also bringing cultural elements such as the outrigger canoe. Between 1200 and 800 BC, the ancestors of the Polynesians, the Lapita people, arrived from the Bismarck archipelago with their characteristic ceramics. European contact. The first European to visit the islands was the Spanish navigator Álvaro de Mendana de Nera, coming from Peru in 1568. The people of Solomon Islands were notorious for headhunting and cannibalism before the arrival of the Europeans. Missionaries began visiting the Solomons in the mid-19th century. They made little progress at first because blackbirding led to a series of reprisals and massacres. The evils of the labor trade prompted the United Kingdom to declare a protectorate over the Southern Solomons in June 1893. In 1898 and 1899, more outlying islands were added to the protectorate. In 1900, the remainder of the archipelago, an area previously under German jurisdiction, was transferred to British administration apart from the islands of Buka and Bougainville, which remained under German administration as part of German New Guinea. Traditional trade and social intercourse between the western Solomon Islands of Mono and Alu and the traditional societies in the south of Bougainville, however, continued without hindrance. Missionaries settled in the Solomons under the protectorate, converting most of the population to Christianity. In the early 20th century, several British and Australian firms began large-scale coconut planting. Economic growth was slow, however, and the islanders benefited little. In 1908, the islands were visited by Jack London, who was cruising the Pacific on his boat, the Snark. Second World War. With the outbreak of the Second World War, most planters and traders were evacuated to Australia and most cultivations east. Some of the most intense fighting of the war occurred in the Solomons. The most significant of the Allied forces' operations against the Japanese Imperial forces was launched on 7 August 1942, with simultaneous naval bombardments and amphibious landings on the Florida Islands at Tulagi and Red Beach on Guadalcanal. The Battle of Guadalcanal became an important and bloody campaign fought in the Pacific War as the Allies began to repulse Japanese expansion. Of strategic importance during the war were the coast watches operating in remote locations, often on Japanese-held islands, providing early warning and intelligence of Japanese naval, army and aircraft movements during the campaign. Sergeant Major Jacob Vuza was a notable coastwatcher who, after capture, refused to divulge Allied information in spite of interrogation and torture by Japanese Imperial forces. He was awarded a Silver Star Medal by the Americans, which is the United States' third highest decoration for valor in combat. Islanders Bayuku Gasa and Eroni Kumana would be noted by National Geographic for being the first to find the shipwrecked John F. Kennedy and his crew of the PT-109. They suggested using a coconut to write a rescue message for delivery by dugout canoe, which was later kept on his desk when he became the President of the United States. The Solomon Islands was one of the major staging areas of the South Pacific and was home to the famous VMF 214 Black Sheep Squadron commanded by Major Greg Pappy Boyington. The slot was a name for New Georgia Sound when it was used by the Tokyo Express to supply the Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal. Of more than 36,000 Japanese on Guadalcanal, about 26,000 were killed or missing, 9,000 died of disease, and 1,000 were captured. Independent local councils were established in the 1950s as the islands stabilized from the aftermath of the Second World War. A new constitution was established in 1970 and elections were held, although the constitution was contested, and a new one was created in 1974. In 1973 the first oil price shock occurred, and the increased cost of running a colony became apparent to British administrators. Following the independence of neighbouring Papua New Guinea from Australia in 1975, the Solomon Islands gained self-government in 1976. Independence was granted on 7 July 1978. The first Prime Minister was Sir Peter Kenaloria, and Solomon Islands retained the monarchy. In September 2012, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge visited the islands to mark the 60th anniversary of the accession of Queen Elizabeth II. Ethnic violence, commonly referred to as the tensions or the ethnic tension. The initial civil unrest was mainly characterized by fighting between the Is a Taboo freedom movement and the Military Eagle Force. And Dinnan argued that the ethnic conflict label is an oversimplification. In late 1998, militants on the island of Guadalcanal began a campaign of intimidation and violence towards Militan settlers. During the next year, thousands of militants fled back to Militar or to the capital, Honiara. In 1999, the Military Eagle Force was established in response. The reformist government of Bartholomew Ulufavalue struggled to respond to the complexities of this evolving conflict. In late 1999, the government declared a 4-month state of emergency. There were also a number of attempts at reconciliation but to no avail. Ulufavalue also requested assistance from Australia and New Zealand in 1999 but his appeal was rejected. In June 2000, Ulufavalue was kidnapped by militia members of the MEF who felt that, although he was a Militan, he was not doing enough to protect their interests. Ulufavalue subsequently resigned in exchange for his release. Manasseh Sogavare, who had earlier been finance minister in Ulufavalue's government but had subsequently joined the opposition, was elected as prime minister by 23-21 over Rev. Leslie Bostow. However, Sogavare's election was immediately shrouded in controversy because 6 MPs were unable to attend Parliament for the crucial vote. In October 2000, the Townsville Peace Agreement was signed by the military Eagle Force, elements of the IFM, and the Solomon Islands government. This was closely followed by the Marau Peace Agreement in February 2001, signed by the Marau Eagle Force, the Azatabu Freedom Movement, the Guadalcanal Provincial Government, and the Solomon Islands government. However, a key Gwali militant leader, Harold KK, refused to sign the agreement, causing a split with the Gwali groups. Subsequently, Gwali signatories to the agreement led by Andrew Ter joined with the Militan-dominated police to form the Joint Operations Force. During the next 2 years the conflict moved to the weather coast of Guadalcanal as the Joint Operations unsuccessfully attempted to capture KK and his group. New elections in December 2001 brought Sir Alan Kemakeza into the Prime Minister's chair with the support of his People's Alliance Party and the Association of Independent Members. Law and order deteriorated as the nature of the conflict shifted. There was continuing violence on the weathercoast while militants in Honiara increasingly turned their attention to crime and extortion. The Department of Finance would often be surrounded by armed men when funding was due to arrive. In December 2002, Finance Minister Laurie Chan resigned after being forced at gunpoint to sign a check made out to some of the militants. Conflict also broke out in Western Province between locals and Militan settlers. Renegade members of the Bougainville Revolutionary Army were invited in as a protection force but ended up causing as much trouble as they prevented. The prevailing atmosphere of lawlessness, widespread extortion, and ineffective police prompted a formal request by the Solomon Islands government for outside help. With the country bankrupt and the capital in chaos, the request was unanimously supported in Parliament. In July 2003, Australian and Pacific Island police and troops arrived in Solomon Islands under the auspices of the Australian-led Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands. A sizable international security contingent of 2,200 police and troops, led by Australia and New Zealand, and with representatives from about 20 other Pacific nations, began arriving the next month under Operation Help Hem Fren. Since this time some commentators have considered the country a failed state. However, other academics argue that rather than being a failed state, it is an unformed state. A state that never consolidated even after decades of independence. In April 2006, allegations that the newly elected Prime Minister Snyder Rini had used bribes from Chinese businessmen to buy the votes of members of parliament led to mass rioting in the capital Honiara. A deep underlying resentment against the minority Chinese business community led to much of Chinatown in the city being destroyed. Tensions were also increased by the belief that large sums of money were being exported to China. China sent chartered aircraft to evacuate hundreds of Chinese who fled to avoid the riots. Evacuation of Australian and British citizens was on a much smaller scale. Additional Australian, New Zealand and Fijian police and troops were dispatched to try to quell the unrest. Rini eventually resigned before facing a motion of no confidence in Parliament, and Parliament elected Manasseh Sogavare as Prime Minister. Earthquakes on 2 April 2007, Solomon Islands were struck by a major earthquake followed by a large tsunami. Initial reports indicated that the tsunami, which mainly affected the small island of Gizo, was several meters high according to some reports. 5 meters according to the Foreign Office. The tsunami was triggered by an 8.0 magnitude earthquake with a hypocenter 349 kilometers northwest of the island's capital, Honiara, at lat -8.453 long 156.957 and at a depth of 10 kilometers. According to the United States Geological Survey, the earthquake struck at 20 hours 39 minutes and 56 seconds UTC on Sunday, 1 April 2007. Since the initial event and up until 22 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds UTC on Wednesday, 4 April 2007, more than 44 aftershocks of a magnitude of 5.0 or greater were recorded in the region. The death toll from the resulting tsunami was at least 52 people, and the tsunami destroyed more than 900 homes and left thousands of people homeless. Land thrust from the quake has extended out from the shoreline of one island, Ranonga, by up to 70 meters according to local residents. This has left many once pristine coral reefs exposed on the newly formed beaches. With a magnitude of 8.0, this earthquake activated a tsunami that hit altitudes of up to 1.5 meters. The week leading up to the disaster, there was a sequence of earthquakes documented on the Santa Cruz Islands with a magnitude of 6.0. On 12 April 2014, an earthquake listing 7.6 on the Richter scale was reported to hit the area of the Solomon Islands. On 10 July 2015, an earthquake listing of 6.9 on the Richter scale was reported to hit the area of the Solomon Islands. Later, in November that year, an earthquake listing of 7.0 on the Richter scale was reported to hit the area of the Solomon Islands.